Welcome back to High Frights. You know how we do it. If you got it, spark it. Let's get a little weird. I'm your host, Froggy, and tonight's a heavy one. We're going to talk about the kind of story that makes you want to double check the locks on your front door, even if you live in a high rise. We're going back to the 70s and 80s, deep into the Canadian wilderness. We're talking about the Anthill Kids. If you ever heard of the name, you're probably thinking of a cult. But this isn't just a group of people living in the woods. This was a laboratory of people's suffering, run by a man who thought he was a god, a doctor, an executioner wrapped all into one. This is a story of extreme isolation, homemade surgery, and a level of psychological breaking that is almost impossible to wrap your head around. This episode covers extreme physical torture, child abuse, and some of the most graphic medical horror you've ever heard of. If you're having a good trip right now and you want to keep it that way, you might want to save this one for tomorrow or another day. But if you're ready to see how dark the human heart can really get, let's dive in. Every monster has a day one. Roch Default was born on 1947 in Quebec. He wasn't born with a knife in his hand, but he was born with a craving for control. He grew up in a strict religious environment and eventually joined the Seven-Day Adventists. I can never say that word properly. But here's the thing. Roche was too radical, even for the radicals. He started preaching about the end times prophecy. He told anyone who'd listen, that the world was going to end in 79. But he was smart. He didn't start by telling people he was God. He started by being a health guru. He ran these seminars teaching people how to quit smoking, how to eat clean, how to live, naturally. Imagine the late 70s. People are tired of the government, tired of the Vietnam aftermath, and tired of modern chemicals. Roche shows up, rugged, charismatic, bearded, the ultimate organic influencer before that was even a thing. He offered a clean life, and people bought it instantly. By the time he moved his first by the time he by the time he moved his first 12 followers to a remote patch of land in Quebec, he wasn't Roche anymore. He was Mose Moses. He convinced them that to survive the apocalypse, they would have to be like an anthill. Why? Because ants don't have egos. Ants work until they drop, dead for the queen, or in this case, for the king. He was only that mattered. He he was the only mind that mattered. Everyone else was just a limb. So how does one man keep a group of adults from just walking away? A group the group eventually moves to Burnt River, Ohio. We're talking middle of nowhere, no phones, no cars, miles of just thick bushes and wolves. But the real cage wasn't the woods, it was their heads. First, he used sleep deprivation. This is Cult 101. He had them working for 18 to 12 hours a day. And when you're that tired, the prefrontal complex, the part of your brain that handles logic, just kind of shuts down. You become like a zombie. Then came the communal confessions. He'd make everyone sit in the circle and confess their sins. And if you didn't have a sin, he'd invent one. For example, he'd say things like, I saw you looking at that tree with pride. Now you're a sinner, and only Moses can fix you. Now let's talk about the people that actually were in the group. Roch hated competition. He systematically emasculated every man there. He made them perform humiliating tasks, forcing them to wear dresses or make them watch while he took their wives as his own. He wanted to ensure that he was the only quote unquote alpha. I apologize for laughing at that. Oh god. If the men are broken, they won't protect the women. If the women are broken, they won't protect the kids. Total dominance. Now, this is kind of where we hit the peak of where the fright comes in. As the years went on, Dosh descended into heavy alcoholism. He was brewing gallons of homemade plum wine. He was drunk, bloated, and convinced he had divine medical powers. He started performing quote unquote surgeries. No anesthesia, no sterilation at all, just a kitchen knife and a bottle of wine. If a child cried too much, he'd say that they had an evil spirit in their leg, and then he'd try to operate. The breaking point for the group should have been in 1988. The Solage, the Solage Boilard. She had a stomach ache. A normal person gives you an antacid. Roch, he said that she had a blockage of the soul. He laid her on the kitchen table, took the knife, and opened her up. He literally reached inside of her body and pulled out her, innards, trying to clean them with his bare hands. She died in a level of agony that even I can't describe. And you know what he told the group? He said that she died because she didn't have enough faith. He made the others help bury her like she was trash. He didn't spare his own children either. He would break their legs with stones to test their pain tolerance. He would make them stand in freezing waters for hours. Now, before we even get more into this, let's take a second to take a hit if you got it. If you don't, I'm going to, because this is getting a little too dark even for me. So, gardening people, cheers. Jeez, let me get some water. I think I hit a little too hard. Now, before we even get back into this really has you kind of wondering, like, how did 20 adults that was in this group just kind of sit there and watch this all kind of happen and go down? It's like the bystander effect on steroids. When you're isolated and starved and told that the outside world is all just Satan, I guess the kitchen table just becomes your whole universe at that point. Now we talk about another person that I guess was part of this group called Gab- Gabrielle Lavalley. I apologize if I'm butchering these names. None of these names are of English language or of any language that I speak, so apologies. She was a nurse. She was smart. And because she was smart, Roche hated her. He wanted to break her more than anyone else in the group. In 1989, Roch went into the drunken rage. He decided that Gabrielle was possessed. Over several days, he performed quote unquote surgery on her. This is going to get very, very graphic really quickly. If you don't want to hear this, you might want to skip ahead or just turn the volume down for like maybe a minute or two. He decided to cut off her right breast with a hunting knife. He pinned her hand onto the table with a knife and hacked off her fingers. He even tried to saw off her arm with a dull wood saw. Gabrielle realized something in that moment. She was gonna die. There was no more faith, no more Moses. It was only the woods. But she escaped. She crawled and ran through the Canadian bushes, mutilated and bleeding out, fueled by only pure survival instinct. She reached the highway. When she finally got to the hospital, the doctors didn't think she'd been in a cult. They thought she survived a plane crash or a war zone. Her body was a map of Roch's insanity. Once Gabrielle spoke, the hammer came down. The Ontario the Ontario Provincial Police moved in. They expected a commune, but they found a nightmare. Filth, starving kids, and Roche, who was still acting like he was the king of the mountain. The trial was massive. Gabrielle's testimony was the nail in the coffin. And Roche Thurl was sentenced to life in prison. But the story doesn't just end in a courtroom. It finally ends in 2011 in a Dosher penitentiary. Roche was still trying to manipulate people behind bars, but he ran into someone he couldn't break. His cellmate was Matthew Gurley MacDonald. Yes, his last name actually is MacDonald. I'm not mispronouncing that. On a random February morning, MacDonald decided he had enough of the prophet, and he ended up killing Roch in his cell. Think about the irony here, just for a second. The man who actually lived by the knife, who spent decades mutilating people who actually ended up loving him, like they did honor him as a god at some point, died violently at the hands of another broken man in a tiny concrete room. At the end, there really is no followers, no mountain. It was just the end. If you're still with me here, try to shake off that energy, even though the story of the Anthill Kids is a dark reminder of what happens when we stop questioning authority and let the isolation take over. Rothschild wasn't a god. He was a broken, violent alcoholic who found people at their most vulnerable and fed on them. And shout out to the survivors, especially Gabrielle Lovely. Apologies if that's mispronunciation. Who turned her trauma into a story of incredible resilience. Stay safe out there with everyone. Please don't join any cults this week. Stay elevated. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.